Good and gracious God, we invite your Spirit upon us. Open our hearts to hear your voice. Strengthen our will to not only discern your will, but to do it with love and enthusiasm. Give us the grace of interior peace, and also strengthen our hearts with the gift of your joy, because joy is a serious business of heaven. And so it's something that we should take great time to cultivate with great care. We ask you to protect us from the evil one and for all things that try to steal our peace. Protect us from all the things that weigh on our hearts and lead us to seek consolation in other things than you. And we ask all of this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So today I wanted to ponder a little bit two parables of Jesus, because I think they give incredible insight into the invitation that Lent provides for us. The first is the parable of the sower, and the second one is another parable about the seed, the weeds and the wheat, right? So the first one is about the good and graciousness of the sower who goes about sowing, of which we are all called by vocation through our baptism and through our confirmation to participate in that unique vocation of the sower, to spread God's word with all of our heart, with all our enthusiasm. But then there's another point that I want to make about the seed itself that we're sowing, right? And where does it land, and how does it grow? And how does God deal with the growth of the seed? Because it's not intuitive for us. It's actually counterintuitive, and we often take attitudes. Juanita mentioned a little bit like perfectionism, that actually are not in line with God's way that he sees us. But what the devil does is he projects onto ourselves identities that are not godly, and they're not from God. But we incorporate them because we hear them so often, whether it be externally, because of the world, or even the devil who whispers into our ears. We internalize them as our own voice. And so we start to believe them because they start to become a pattern for our own heart, right? And I think sometimes, things like I'll never be enough, that no matter how hard I work, that it just never measures up, that God's disappointed in me, that God is always looking out at me and seeing whether I measure up enough. Those aren't things that God does. Those are things that we project onto God, right? So let's just begin with it. The first parable is from Matthew chapter 13, the parable of the sower. On that day, Jesus went out of the house, and he was in Capernaum, so in his own intimate setting, where he had set up his camp, in Capernaum. He came out of his house and sat down by the sea. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat down, and the whole crowd stood along the shore. And he spoke to them at length in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground, where it had little soil. It sprang up at once, because the soil was not deep, and when the sun rose, it was scorched, and it withered for lack of root. Some of the seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it. But some seed fell on rich soil, and produced fruit 100 or 60 or 30-fold. Whoever has ears ought to hear. And I'm going to jump ahead, because he gives a little explanation about that. I'm not going into that. The parable of the weeds and the wheat. He proposed another parable for them. The kingdom of God may be likened to a man who sowed good seed in his field. While everyone was asleep, his enemy came and sowed weeds all through the wheat, and then went off. When the crop grew and bore fruit, the weeds appeared as well. The slaves of the master came to him and said, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where have the weeds come from? He answered, my enemy has done this. His servant said to him, do you want us to go and pull them up? He replied, no. If you pull up the weeds, you might uproot the wheat along with them. Let them grow together until the harvest. Then at harvest time, I will say to the harvesters, collect first the weeds and tie them into bundles for burning. Then gather the wheat into my barns. So we find ourselves before this image of, there's a beautiful icon that I wish I had. I'm gonna buy, but it's a beautiful icon of the sower. And as you go around the icon, you can see the different images. Like the beginning with a little tree in the background, which is an image of like the garden, and then it goes underneath his feet. It's all cracked ground, kind of like the sin that came and was. And then they show him just chucking seed everywhere, all different types of seeds. And then at the very end, you see these beautiful bushes in this larger mountain, which is kind of indicative of where we're headed towards heaven. But the sower goes and he just abundantly pours out his heart. Think about that. I mean, we usually hear this kind of this parable, but we don't think about like, what is the disposition of the sower? Like, does he seem daunted that the seed doesn't always bear the fruit that he hopes it does? He's just throwing seeds everywhere. And he's not worrying about where it falls. He just keeps abundantly sowing. And that's the goodness of God. He keeps sowing and sowing and sowing and sowing. And it shows the richness of God's love. We're not that way. Think about it. If you had seed, you would measure out, like, where am I going to put this? Is it going to be the best soil? That's how we are. We want to control everything. Control the factor, control the sun, control this. It's funny, there's a company called 80 Acres that my little brother invested in. And they have these huge buildings, like these Amazon things that are plopping all around us, like literally all around us. And so they, inside there, they grow food, but they control all the factors, right? So that they get the maximum. It's actually, it's near a lot of different places, so they could actually, the whole thing is you get 5 or 6 more days for lettuce, which is a big deal. I mean, well, it doesn't seem like you put it in the refrigerator and like 3 days later it's wilted and terrible. But if you get an extra 5 days, that makes all the difference in the world. But again, the point is that they control all the factors. But if you notice, God is not that way. And we discover that in the second parable. He's not that way. He's not a control freak like we are. He just throws the seed and just throws more and just throws more. And so he's wasteful in his abundance and goodness. God is wasteful with his mercy and his love. And people get upset with that. Remember, we'll read when we get closer to Holy Week, the story of the woman who was so touched by Jesus, whose life was so changed and was so life-changing that she brings this perfume and this spikenard, and she just breaks the whole bottle and just dumps the whole thing out on his feet. And Judas, well, John always gets the jabs at Judas, but Judas is like, that should be used for, we could have sold that for X number of wages, and we could have fed more people and done more things. And Jesus is like, the poor you have with you always. Don't you? You don't understand. He says, this woman will be forever remembered for her act of generosity. Because wherever the gospel is proclaimed, she will be remembered. Think about that. And it filled the whole room with the fragrance. That's how God is. And Jesus praised her, and he thanked her, and he says, keep the rest until the day of my burial. She had no idea what that meant, but he did. And so I think that's the attitude of the sower. And he praised this woman because she had the same attitude, the same disposition. When it comes to God, he asks us to break all of our schemes, all of our fears, all of our anxiety, to bring it all to him and let him pour out his abundance upon us. But oftentimes, we can't receive his abundance. I mean, because we're afraid. And because we've squeezed him into this kind of abundance. In the spiritual life, there's darkness, because we talk about light, dark, sin, God's grace. There's a darkness that comes about because of the consequences of our own sinfulness. Now, we've all experienced that in abundance. Let's be honest. I don't have to go into detail there. But there's just some things, there's a big debate, even among clergy, even among bishops, about certain dispositions, certain attitudes, certain sins, certain all this. Right now, there's some things going around. People are asking me all kinds of questions. I'm not going to get into that. But the point is that it doesn't matter your best intentions, that the reality is built in such a way that our sinfulness, whether you're aware of all the consequences in it or not, has consequences, right? It breaks us. It just does. And so we're in need of mercy. We're in need of God's mercy. But so that darkness that comes from that, we know. And so we ask the Lord to send light upon us, to open our eyes, to see, that we may hear and see his voice. But as we progress in the spiritual life, as we go along, the great mystics, the men and women who shared their intimacy of God with us, and is part of that capital T, right? Capital T of tradition. They tell us that we will go through these dark nights, that we'll go through these dark nights of our soul, whether it be of our senses, of our spirit, that is a type of purification. But the purpose of the purification is that we may see more. Because our faith is small and it needs to grow. And so the other day I was exercising my lack of patience. So God was growing me. And so I was coming down, and I had a parish mission in the southern part was in northern Kentucky, and I was coming from the northern part of Cincinnati. And it took me like an hour and a half to go like 6 exits. It was like so I finally get over the river, and if you go up the river, I mean, there's this huge hill that comes up crest the top of the hill. So it was around 5:45, 6 o'clock in the evening on a sunny day. So it's right when it's right in your eyes. You know what I'm talking about? No matter, even if you flip down the thing, it's like right in your eyes. So I'm driving. So I'm coming up the hill, and so it's fine because the hill blocks the sun. But as I crest that hill, it's like, boom, I'm blind, I hope I don't hit someone, it's like, so then we go past, and that's how God is with us. I couldn't see, not because it was dark, but because there was an abundance of light. And so the dark night of our soul, as we grow closer to God, is and our inability to feel him and see him the way that we want, is because we're just not capable of receiving him the way he is, not the way that we want him to be. He doesn't like to conform himself to us. Like, God is God, and we're not. So we have to expand ourselves to receive him as he is, as God is, just as he is. And so that is how he expands our faith. He stretches us, he pushes us. But it's abundant light. And sometimes we're like, it's dark, I can't feel. No, it's not. He's just stretching you. He's just expanding your capacity to love. So again, this sower is just sowing abundantly, and he's going along, and he's giving. Now, let's talk about the seed. Have you noticed that the sower has total confidence in the seed? Wherever it will find any kind of fruitful soil, it'll take root and it will produce 30 to 60 to 90. That's how confident he is in the seed. That what I give you, the word of God, the seed of God, the love that God gives us, if it finds even the smallest modicum of receptivity and openness, it bears fruit. Because that's how God is. God is never sterile. All the attitudes of the church towards life issues, doesn't matter what the issue is, whether it be at the beginning of life or the end of life, it all comes from who we believe God is. God is life, period. Just a period. God is love, period. No qualifications, no commas, no colons, no semicolons. God is love. God is life. And so when we reflect that as images and likeness of God, we have to reflect the same dispositions of God. And the life that he gave was the light of man. That's what John would say. It's the life of man. It's the life of us. It's our life. Christ, our life. I am the way. I am the truth. I am life. So this life, he believes, this seed will bear fruit. It will bear fruit if we're receptive, if there's soil. But the truth is he knows that it's not that simple. That the world we live in is complicated. That we're broken. That we're sinful. And that's all part of his plan. And so he throws the seed, and some falls on the ground, the birds come and eat it up. Well, just take out this thing. There's plenty of birds ready to eat your seed. You know what I mean? There's just plenty. They're waiting there like vultures. Just, bing, they grab it up. Then And then he talks about that the shallow root. The shallow root. And because the sun comes out and scorches it. Or he talks about the cares of life and the distractions of life, which are like thorns choking things out. Choking it out. So, and then we find that the seed among the good things, and this is what he explains to us, we know that there's not everything in us is not always godly. Our strengths and weaknesses go hand in hand. And he knows that too. So in the impatience that you have to get rid of the weed, get rid of all the weeds. I want them out now. For who? For God's sake? Or for your sake? Do you know how vain and how proud you would be if God removed all your defects right away? Do you know that you would attribute all of his grace and all of his mercy and all of the things that sanctify us to yourself? Just be honest. Be honest. And we would be insufferable. We would be insufferable. But in his mercy, he doesn't. So he does not ask us for certain dispositions and perfections that he asks us, like we heard today, to do your best, to love with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind. Just do your best. Show up. Be present. Be in the game. And let him do what God does best, which is like with Joseph. He does these miracles that you have no idea. Like you couldn't even make this stuff up. But he does it all the time. So I want to talk finally about one practical application of this, which is overcoming in this Lenten journey what I call the vice of modernity, the vice of Western culture, our vice, which is acedia. So, of the 7 capital sins, sloth is one, remember? And in the United States, we think because we're very efficient, that we don't have sloth in that regard. But it's a poor translation, to be honest, because the real word is called acedia, and it's interesting. I have a friend of mine, Acedia. So acedia, so it's really about a friend of mine is doing his work at DMU actually, where Laura's doing her work on this particular defect as it relates to the life of clergy, because that's what his thesis is. But he was talking about like the better translation would be existential boredom or angst.
The dread.
Dread, that's a good one. That's a good one. And so the things of God actually cause us sadness. The good things of God. So like, I'll give you concrete applications. How many times are you afraid to get closer to God because the cross? So therefore, I'm afraid. I don't want anything to do with that. I would rather not even think about that. Well, that's a form of acedia. Because but I'm okay with gouging myself with like cookies and this and other stuff. Okay, I'm comfort foods. I'm okay with, but I'm not. The effort that would imply that I even begin to think about. I start to get like a resistance or rejection of that. Well, it's interesting. He says the 2 main manifestations of acedia. Get this. The first one is activism. Talk about America. So when you sit before what's going on inside of you in God's presence, you just can't take it. So what do I have to do? I have to do something. So I get up and just start doing. And the sign of that is what you're doing and why you're doing it, the meaning of it, the rich meaning of why I love the way I love and what I'm doing, meaning just gets sucked out of your life. So before I know, I'm just doing. And I don't even know why I'm doing. Have you ever like just want to sit down and you know God is calling you to prayer and you're like, I'm not going. If you're honest, you won't say that. You'll be like, you'll walk in and just kind of, okay, I'm out of here, you know. But you're like, but you really, you can't sit there, and you won't sit there, and you run off I really have to do the laundry and all this stuff. It just all needs to be done right now. Right, and it's prayer time, sure.
That's my vocation.
And then, and then the other extreme of this is self-soothing and kind of a laziness, like an empty boredom that you just sit there and you fill your things with just emptiness, which the addictions are part of it, right? That's what they're boredom. Sound familiar? So I could just sit there and look at my phone for an hour and a half, but when I went to prayer, I had to get these things done immediately. Sound familiar? Sound modern? Does it sound like our life today? So there's these two extremes that we find. It was interesting. I was driving up to above Detroit for my retreat, and I was driving through Cincinnati and then through part of the state, and online gambling became legal in Ohio. I know it's in Indiana too, but it was unbelievable how many billboards were for online gambling. And all that is just the acedia of filling myself with distraction because. So let's give our young people one more thing to become addicted to. And then the other signs were for lawyers who are saying, if you're addicted, call me. So it's kind of it's ironic. And then I get to Michigan and I cross the border, and everywhere I look, we have the best pot. Our pot is better than your pot. We smoke pot. It's like marijuana everywhere. It's like ridiculous. Again, more addiction, more acedia, more running away from God, more running away from my interior. More running away from my responsibilities. I mean, it's just this society we live in. And so that's the weed. That's the weed that's been sown into our lives. Yeah, it is called weed. I mean, plenty of it. And so it's been what's been sown among our wheat. It's the other seed that's being sown there by the enemy of our soul. And he's just saying, it's okay. This is normal. It's not normal. It's spiritual cancer for us. It steals our joy. It steals meaning. Why is that the young people that are our hope, our greatest joy? I mean, these little people that were running all over they're our greatest joy. They are the future. They are God's life incarnated in little people. And yet, how is it that today so many young people are listless and heavy and sad and over psychologicalized? You know what I mean? They explain everything like I'm this and this and this. Just be a kid. Go outside and run. Like go fall for your bike. You got more important things to worry about than, you know what I mean? Like, why is it so heavy? Why? I buried way too many kids. It just kills me. I mean, way before their time, and it's just disastrous. I hate it. And it's just the enemy sowing weeds. And it's not God. And don't call it God. And don't call it something else. It's not the dark night of our soul. Now, when we experience the dark night of the soul, if we don't interpret it correctly, if we don't keep working, actually in times of desolation, you're supposed to double down according to the rules. You're supposed to work harder. You're supposed to love more, give more to God, or just sit in the presence of God and let him fill you. That's what we know. That's what we need to do more. Don't run from it. Don't run from this. Because you won't get away from it. If you go to the bottom of the sea, if you go to the farthest ends of the universe, he'll still be waiting there and saying, hey, I'm still here. You're not getting away from me. Just like Adam and Eve. Yeah. I see your nakedness. Like, who told you that you were naked? I made you naked. So what? So what? I made you with your strengths and your defects. So what? I know how to use them. I still have a plan for you. You're still my beloved. I still have plans for you. Plans not of woe, he says, but of fullness and richness of life. I have come that you can have life in abundance. Abundant. You understand that? That you bear fruit, lasting fruit. Fruit that lasts all eternity. That's why I made you. I didn't make you to be sterile. I didn't make you to be sad and heavy laden. I didn't say life was going to be perfect. I said it's going to be hard. Take up your cross each day and follow me. That's just what we have to do. Don't turn back from the plow. Once you're plowing, keep plowing forward. But But it's important that we don't start to project onto God things that are not God's. Those are our issues, not God's issues. But see, the sower comes and he desires us to be the joyful giver that he is. What you receive freely, give freely. When I give abundantly, give abundantly. Just pour yourself out. Don't worry. I'll give you enough. If you come back to me, I will fill you. Guess what? If you try to fill yourself, good luck. What will you do? You'll get more frustrated, more burnt out, more angry. And then you'll be a happy little camper when people come in. You'll be like pleasancy, like I was that day with my thoughts towards the people that were driving slow in front of me and blocking me from getting where I needed to go. But it's just, that's just stuff. I mean, we're all there. We all know it. We all know our stuff. Right? But again, this is the God that we love and serve. This is the God that we love and serve. He is an abundant God, a gracious God. He is rich in mercy. He will never be outdone. Ever. Do you understand that? Ever. He will always be more. He is mystery. He is meaning. He is purpose. He is identity. He is love. He will always be more. When you try to box him in, the harder you push him in, the harder he'll push back. But the more your concepts try to squeeze him in, he's like, watch this. Your life will be like, okay, I go to my knees again, right? I go to my knees again. Why? Because on our knees, we look up. And we look up, and what do we see? We see one crucified who doesn't come down. He doesn't come down. It says, when I am lifted up, I will draw all of them to myself. So this great mystery of how God does things, all we can do is watch and follow and believe. He's the one who reveals. He's the one who unfolds it. We can't change it to fit our plans. And when you do, you only do violence to yourself and to the plan. Now God will keep working with your plans, we heard today. Like he's working with Judah, and he's working with Reuben, he's working with Joseph, and Joseph's telling everyone his dreams. And now, all of Joseph's dreams came true. But you know that Joseph wasn't doing it with the bet. Like, God told me you're all going to bow before me. Ha ha ha. You know what I mean? Like, he needs a good kick in the rear end. That's what he needed. And God taught him through his suffering. But he also taught all the brothers through their suffering. And they thought he was dead. And so they had to sit with that for years, and it gnawed at them. There's a beautiful scene that I'll leave you with. So Joseph brings all his brothers in at the end. And they're talking about the sadness of what they've done. Finally, there's true contrition of the heart. And he comes in because he can't, they hear him sobbing. Sobbing. And so he comes out. And then all the Egyptians hear it too. And because God was greater than all of that. And he missed his family, and they missed him. And in the end, he said, do not be sad. He says, God has done greater things than we could ever imagine. Through this, our weakness. And so through our wheat, that he will throw into the furnace to burn. Even through the weeds. Even through the weeds that God will gather up. He will do greater things than you ever imagined. Because God is good all the time, everywhere. And so let us nurture our heart on that. And let us let the seed fall deep. Let's throw off the other shackles of all the other stuff and ask God to give us 30 to 60. There's my coffee.